Hi, everyone. It's Lori from Carnivore Cheer, and I'd like to welcome you and thank you for stopping by today. If this is your first time visiting my channel, a hearty welcome to you, and I hope you will enjoy what you have seen today. I'd also like to give a special thank you to all of my new subscribers. Thank you so much for joining my subscriber family. I appreciate each and every one of my subscribers. So I hope you will find value in what you hear today. And if you do, please do click the like button because that does help increase exposure to my videos. So today, this video is going to focus on a big question. Is the carnivore diet harder for women? Now, this may seem like kind of an elementary question because we're all human beings, we all eat. So why should a diet be harder for one gender than another? So the answer may be yes or no, or somewhere in between. For me, I think that, to my surprise, I found that there were some parts of my history that did make coming to this point in my dietary journey a lot more difficult. So it's not the carnivore diet itself being harder for women, at least from my perspective, but it was getting to this point. And I think that may have affected other women as well, because all of us, both male and female, have received a lot of bad information, bad data, terrible messaging, about saturated fat, meat, and other misinformation about which types of foods are healthy and which are not. But in looking back at my own history, I had to really rediscover some additional cultural conditioning that was targeted specifically at women that made my journey all these years especially complex, more difficult, and more painful. And I wanted to share that because I thought it might provide some additional perspectives for other women too. Although, I'm sure men have heard a lot of this as well. So this may have reached the ears of some of my male viewers. So before we get into the details, I just want to share some notes. First, I want to assure you that I offer this video with the full awareness that men's and women's bodies are different. We are just physiologically structured differently. So I'm not going to talk about whether the carnivore diet is more or less challenging for women from either a physiological or a metabolical point of view, because I'm not qualified to talk in that direction. Plus, I know that, women, for example, we bear children, and, that has a huge impact on our metabolism, our emotions, our hormones, everything else. And so that is something that is a unique factor for us. So please be assured that I understand this, and I'm going to focus mostly on cultural conditioning and social messaging that has had a special target for women. And that brings me to my next note for you gentlemen. If you happen upon this video and you think it's not relevant to you and you feel like you want to click off, please do stay with us. Even though we're going to talk about issues that affect women, actually, this really does touch in some ways on the way men react to seeing women eat, or, how women and men eat together. So, there may be some things that will be valuable to you. And who knows, you may find some information that can help you to understand and support a woman you care about who is facing eating challenges. So please do stay with us. I hope you will. My final note is for anyone who is, much younger, or anyone who is in their teen years. If you're watching this video, some of the things I'm going to be talking about go way, way back, many years, sometimes many decades. So this may seem like ancient history to you. So please consider it part of a woman's dietary history. And I think that will provide some valuable perspectives for you, because there may be things that you have heard that you didn't hear before that even though they go back many generations, you may feel some relationship to that information and what women are hearing today, and men, of course. So just with those notes, I hope this will provide a little bit clearer perspective on where we're going to go with this. So now let's go after it. Is the carnivore diet, or getting to the carnivore diet, harder for women? Now, before I go into some of the themes and details I'm going to talk about, it's important to understand how terminology has affected the way that women look at their appearance and their bodies. For example, women often describe themselves in terms of things like weight, calories, their waistline, their figure, their shape, whether they're an apple shape or a pear shape, or, anything about their figure and the shape. And, certain sizes or proportions in their body. I've heard women joke around and say, for example, well, I can just look at a plate of brownies and the fat goes right on my hips. That's something that women tend to talk about in jest, but there's maybe some serious implications there and some challenges for them. So it's very important to put that into perspective. And what's sad about that is that a lot of times when women do talk about their bodies, there are a couple of terms that are missing: healthy and vibrant. And those are what really, really matter. So all of these things kind of play into, the kind of overshadow, how women kind of look at themselves physically and culturally in terms of eating. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about, some of this cultural messaging for women in terms of 4 major themes. Theme number 1 is that you're not supposed to enjoy eating, or at least don't make it look like you enjoy eating. Theme number 2 is, there's some special foods that are just for women's food, and it's lower calorie, low or no fat, and so, this is the type of food that women often feel that they must eat. Theme number 3 is put others first before yourself in terms of your dietary needs and dietary health. That is a very tough one because that aligns with a lot of other cultural conditioning that women face. And finally, number 4, do whatever is necessary to keep those pounds off. And this is where, there are some dangerous ways in which unethical companies have promoted ways for women to stay slender and keep the pounds off. And this has very dangerous and tragic implications, and we're going to look into that a little bit. So let's get started with theme number 1. Don't enjoy eating, and at least don't make it look like you enjoy eating. And this goes back a long, long time, because I know now, if you've heard some things about the religious influence on the perceptions of food, and this applies to both males and females, where, there were people that were saying, it's not, there are certain foods that are just not good because they raise carnal desires, for example, red meat. And that was just, horrifying for women to do. We could not do that. We could not put ourselves at risk for any carnal desires. And so, that was really quite sad. And there's this idea that women have to just minimize the amount of food they consume. So that's how terms like eat like a bird came up. And if you have seen the movie Gone with the Wind, which I believe most of us have, you might remember a scene early in the film where the beautiful Scarlett O'Hara is getting ready to attend a barbecue at a nearby plantation. So her servants are helping her get her dress all ready and her hair just right and everything else for her to go to the barbecue. And her major servant, her mammy, wants her to, have a light lunch before she goes to the barbecue, because they don't know what type of food is going to be served or when they're going to serve it. So another servant comes in with a plate saying, "Oh, I brought Miss Scarlett's victuals," and Scarlett says, "Well, you can take it all back to the kitchen. I am doing all my eating at the barbecue." And her mammy says, "Oh, no, you're not. I'm not having you go over there and gobble up like a hog. You can always tell a lady the way she eats like a bird." And I thought, wow, eat like a bird. Boy, they were using that phrase 160 years ago, even though, I don't know, maybe they didn't use it that often, but I couldn't help noticing that, because that term "eat like a bird" has persisted all these years. And a lot of times you hear women, talk about an extremely thin woman or someone who doesn't eat very much, and they'll say, "Oh, she eats like a bird." Now, think about how small birds are. And you're talking about little to no food. And that's really tough, because I've never heard anybody say a man eats like a bird. So this is, something that has special meaning towards women. And that's really tough. So this idea of not really enjoying eating, or at least not appearing to enjoy eating, I actually picked up on that starting in high school. For example, I remember when I was in senior year, for example. Now, this was a time when, girls had already had a few years of wanting to look pretty. They were worried about their weight. Several of them have already gone on many, many diets, and they just, felt under great pressure to look nice always. So I remember sitting at the lunch table with some of my classmates, and they were, well, not really eating their lunch. They were just kind of jabbing at it and not very interested in it. And one girl said, "You know, I eat to survive. If I didn't have to eat to live, I wouldn't eat at all." And several women nodded, and I just sat there. "Ugh, I'm not going to say anything, because I do enjoy eating. I don't eat to survive. I eat because I like it." And I couldn't help notice that everybody at the table except me had left a whole bunch of food on their plates. And so I felt kind of awkward, because this whole thing about not enjoying eating just didn't apply to me. And at the same time, I also knew that I was, even though I love meat, and always would, I was eating more and more carbs and sugar. And, I had to that was my dirty little secret. So, I felt awkward both from just the way I ate in general. And now, as a young woman, it's like, I don't fit in here. That's not my attitude at all. And, I felt really kind of out of place almost. And this continued in college. Now, I went to a university that was far enough away from my home so that I lived in the dorm. So I ate dining hall food for 4 years. And I felt very grateful to go to college, because when I started freshman year, my parents had both passed away. And I felt very fortunate that I could even go to college. I didn't have to drop out. I was able to continue with my plan to get a college education. So I came to school quite grateful. So I go to the dining hall, and, now in many universities, it's kind of almost a standing joke that all the students hate the food and they make fun of it. And, dining hall food is not known for its gourmet flair or variety, or especially good taste. So, a lot of students were used to having delicious home cooked meals. And of course, my mother was gone. She was a great cook, but that type of food was no longer available to me at home. And I felt like it was really a neat thing that I could just go to the dining hall 3 times a day, flash my dining hall card, go in there, go through the cafeteria line, take a full course meal, all the beverages I wanted, dessert, and go back for seconds and thirds. I mean, holy cow, that was almost a miracle to me. I was grateful for that. But once again, in the presence of my fellow female students, I was starting to feel some real awkwardness and kind of not feeling too good about myself the way I ate. Because I always, since I, was grateful to even be there and have this food accessible to me, I usually ate almost everything on my plate, and of course potatoes, and I always had a roll of butter. And I noticed that the guys, they constantly made jokes about the food and how crummy it was and everything, but I did happen to notice that they ate it because they were hungry. And they ate most of it anyway. And if they were still hungry, they would go back to their rooms, and a few hours later, they'd order out for a pizza or a bunch of sandwiches. Now, the women took their dislike of the food far more seriously, and that's where I started to feel some real discomfort. I mean, I didn't care how much the guys didn't like the food, and they didn't really care about what I was eating either, but I just felt really self-conscious around the women because they didn't like it and they would not eat it a lot of the times, or they might take just a few small bites and then, this is a yucky meal. Or they'd take a roll and maybe just cut it in half and then just, bleh, disgusting. And they would push their plates away. And of course, once they pushed their plates away, all of that uneaten food went right into the trash. And that troubled me right there because I was so grateful to be able to even have access to all this food. So there were a couple of conflicts for me here. Number one, I knew coming in that this was institutional food. I mean, this school served hundreds of students every day, 3 times a day, 7 days a week. There was no way you could expect, that same home cooked goodness that mom makes at home. And I already knew that. And so the food was certainly not tasty or very flavorful, but it was okay. It tasted good enough to eat. And at least I was getting meals and I didn't have to worry about it. And now this was before, a few years before the awful dietary guidelines were imposed upon individuals and, institutions. So we didn't have quite the amount of ultra processing that, a lot of institutions have now. And all of the dining hall food was cooked right on site in the dining hall kitchens. Nothing was outsourced. So even though it was not top grade nutrition, it didn't taste the greatest, and it probably had a few things that were not so great, but generally it was, pretty decent and certainly adequate for me. But I felt weird being a hearty eater at the dining hall table. I just felt kind of out of place. And I knew my attraction to carbs and sugar was getting more and more problematic year by year. So sometimes I would have maybe seconds on potatoes, or I'd have 2 rolls instead of 1. But I began to feel very self-conscious about that because the other women just didn't eat as much as I did at the table. And I began to ask myself, well, what's wrong with me? I'm just not eating. Am I not eating like a proper young woman? Am I looking like a pig out queen? And I had never had to deal with that before. So it was frustrating. And I went through 4 years of this, and it was very tough. And I did gain weight because I was eating a lot of the food 3 times a day. And by the time I was in my junior year, my 3rd year, I had packed on 15 pounds. And that was when I decided I had to get it off. Now, I had done some yo-yo dieting before, 5 pounds on, 5 pounds off, 10 pounds on, 10 pounds off. Now I was up 15 pounds. So I thought, well, I got to do the same thing I did before. So I starved myself. I ate like probably fewer than 500 calories a day. And that was when, of course, we were counting calories. So the only thing I was thinking of was weight loss. Nothing else mattered. Get the weight off. And I did. I lost all 15 pounds. And I was miserable every single minute of that starvation because I felt I had to do this. I had to trick myself into pretending I wasn't interested in food, even though gosh, I wanted an ice cream cone so bad, or I wanted that roll, I wanted that helping of potatoes, but nope, I have to get the weight off. So I kept it off for the rest of my junior year, and through my senior year, well, I might have put on like 1 or 2 pounds. And so I was able to be relatively slender at graduation, which was good because in the fall, after I graduated, I started my first job in the business world. Now, at the time, I was entering a world where women were making big inroads into more professional and managerial ranks. They didn't have to start out being teachers and secretaries anymore. They could start out as young professionals. So I was really grateful that I was all in with that. But there was a problem because it became very apparent that women felt under great pressure to maintain a top-notch appearance and stay slender, keep those pounds off. Because if a woman wanted to rise through the managerial and executive ranks, especially, if she became overweight and looked fat, that could really sideline her career. So I think women were starting to feel a lot of pressure about that. And that's when articles started appearing in different media sources about how women could manage these shoal dietary waters, where business lunches and conventions had been serving mostly men, and that meant a lot of steak, barbecue, other foods that were kind of considered guy foods. Now we've got these women coming in and attending these types of lunch and dinner events, business related. So we started seeing articles in women's magazines and other areas advising us about how to manage this and protect our waistlines. And now this was way before the internet. And unfortunately, I don't know where this article went. It was years and years ago, and I don't think it was ever digitized, unfortunately, because I wish I had a copy of it. But it burned in my memory, so I can share some of the content that I remember so well, and sadly with a lot of pain. So there were rules of engagement about how you can survive a business lunch or dinner. So if you're a woman and you're seated at the table, if there's a multi-course dinner, for example, with one course being served after another, first of all, when the bread basket was passed around, you either waved it away, or maybe you take a roll, slowly put it on your bread plate, and then just break it in half so it looks like you were going to eat it, even though it was best not to eat it. And of course, no butter. Butter's fat. So the main course was the biggest challenge. So if you were having meat and fish, here's the deal. Very slowly carve up your portion of meat or fish into very small pieces. And then take your fork and learn how to push food around your plate. So just kind of slide the pieces around your plate, your cut up pieces. And then maybe take 1 or 2 occasional bites while spending most of your time talking with your fellow diners. Once again, you don't want to show enthusiasm for eating. You don't want to appear too hungry. You don't want to appear too eager to eat. And of course, this was just horrifying to me. This wasn't the way I wanted to eat. I don't want to sit there pushing my fork around my plate. If I had a nice piece of beef or steak or chicken, I wanted to enjoy it, but I had to put all that aside because I didn't want to stick out like a sore thumb at the table. I didn't want to appear unprofessional or anything like that. So this was really, really tough. And of course, when it came to dessert, when the server came around with desserts, you waved them away, or if they put the dessert down before you could stop them, just take your fork or your spoon and just kind of jab at it a couple of times, and then maybe just take one little bite and then push it away. And of course, that was so hard for me to do. A lot of times I tried not to eat the whole dessert because the idea was the less you eat, the better. So that's why this pushing food around was, a technique that was seen as valuable for women, because the more you did that, the less you ate. And the less you ate, the less risk of damage to your waistline and the less risk of putting on an extra pound or so. So those were the rules. And it was just really, really tough for me. And sometimes I would just feel so frustrated by this that in the evening, sometimes I'd make a stop at the grocery store and, I'd get an extra sandwich, or I even get a pizza or, bag of potato chips, just so that I could, for the first time in the whole day, I could enjoy something to eat. And, of course, this was not good for me, because whenever I rebelled against these rules, of course, that was bad for me, and I rebelled with carbs and sugar. And so then, there was more weight gain coming on, and the yo-yo throw got longer and longer. And over the years, I was packing on a lot of weight until I reached well over 200 pounds. And I also realized at the time that as much as I wanted to be a successful professional in the business, I also felt extreme stress. And what did I do to manage that stress? I ate. Whenever it was, I had a tough situation with a client, or I felt I wasn't doing something right, in the evening, I eat the stress away. And this just, wasn't working for me, because I felt shame at the weight that I was gaining, and I had to wear bigger and bigger sizes, and then I went into plus sizes, and that didn't help my self-esteem one single bit. Plus, I felt out of place as a woman. I could not understand why I couldn't get with the program as far as eating, like other women ate. It just really troubled me, but I just rebelled every single time. I mean, for appearance's sake, I would go along and, make it look like I was following the rules, but boy, I hated every single second of that. And so this whole idea of, not appearing to enjoy eating was tremendously conflicting to me. It just didn't help me at all. And I felt very frustrated, because men could continue eating. I mean, they could have a steak, great big old ribeye, and enjoy it. And it was like I felt kind of cheated as a woman. So, this theme, went on and on for me. And I remember later years, I would go out to lunch sometimes with some female coworkers, and they always wanted to go to a place where they could get salad. So I would go along with them, but if there was a burger on the menu, I'd get that. And once again, I just felt different. I felt like, I just didn't feel like a proper woman in the way I was eating. So this theme really caused me a lot of problems, and I did not realize how extensively that theme was acting on me. I only recalled this recently, but it was part of the whole package of why my dietary journey was so destructive and so difficult to throw off. So, don't enjoy eating, didn't work for me. Theme number 2 was about women's food. And sometimes women would talk about, well, let's go to this place. They've got, salads and little fruit plates and stuff, women's food. And I would hear that, and I would die a thousand deaths inside, because it's like, I don't want that stuff. I want beef, I want eggs. And of course I wanted the carbs and sugar too. But once again, it's like, I didn't want to eat what they called women's food, because I considered anything that tasted good to be food, male or female notwithstanding. So that was real torture for me. And I remember one particular example that really just kind of drove me crazy. There was a printed ad in a magazine. And once again, this was before the internet and it was not digitized. And I wish I had a copy of it because it was an ad for one of these family pizza fun restaurants. So the ad showed a family of four, mom and dad, a boy maybe 11 and a girl maybe about 8. They were all at the restaurant, seated at the table, big smiles on their faces. And each one of them was holding up a plate of food in one hand and a beverage cup in the other hand with the soda company's logo on it. So on dad's plate, 2 slices of pretty good sized pizza and a cup filled with his favorite soda. The kids, 1 pretty decent sized slice of pizza with their favorite soda with the soda company's logo. On mom's plate, sorry, mom doesn't get any pizza because mom has to watch her weight. She has to control her calories. So on mom's plate is a big salad with some vegetables on top. No dressing. And her beverage cup shows the company's diet soda logo. And I thought, oh, golly, look at this. They are separating. They're sending a message. Women have to eat this, but men can eat this. Pizza bad, salad good for women. And it's like, not again. Because I know a lot of people love salad. I just never did, and I never will. And every time I try to force myself to believe that I should eat it, it just never worked. Now, some people might argue that this ad, the way they did that was only to show that this restaurant served not just pizza, you could have other types of food. Well, that's fine. But if they wanted to do that, why didn't they show a small salad at each family member's place setting? And there you go. You can show that they serve more than one type of food. They didn't do that. They targeted mom to have lower calorie, food, because that's what was perceived as what she needed to stay slender and not gain weight. And I never forgot that. I resented the heck out of that ad. And, it's just like, once again, it's like, am I not eating like a proper woman? What's the matter with me? Why can't I get with a program here? And I just never did. And in recalling all of this, I had forgotten what a difficult impact all of this had on me, all of these messages. They just came, the memory of them just came flooding back. And this is what happens sometimes when you keep learning and teaching yourself about what it means to eat a proper human diet. And this became part of my history that I had suppressed for many years, and recalling it was extremely painful, but very, very valuable. So women's food, oh dear me. So theme number 3, now this is a tough one. Put the needs of others before your own in terms of eating and health. Now this is really, really difficult because it aligns very strongly with the cultural messaging that women have had for generations, that they need to take care of others. They need to put others first in almost every area of their life. Now, we know that the majority of caregivers for ill loved ones are women. We know this for sure. Now, there are men who take care of sick loved ones as well. And, anyone who cares for a sick loved one, deserves a lot of credit because it's very, very hard work. And if you love someone and they're ill, of course you don't, want to turn your back on them. But we have a very difficult caregiving situation in our culture because it's a very lonely, stressful job that can have an impact on the caregiver's health. Because there are stories that I've heard that sometimes the caregiver will get sick because of all the stress of, caring for an ill loved one. And, a lot of times there are very few resources available. The stress is relentless, it's nonstop. So that's tough, and this idea of putting others first sometimes plays out in at the dinner table and in the kitchen when women cook. And this is separate from the whole caregiving thing. But for example, how many times, and I have to look in the mirror when I say this, how many times as a hostess have we, made sure that everyone at our table has, the very best cuts of meat, the freshest rolls out of the oven, the crispiest salad, the best pieces of chicken, even if there's not enough left for us. We tend to take the small pieces, if we're serving chicken, we'll take the wings so that others can have the breasts and the thighs and the legs and the good stuff. And, that's really, once again, a conflict for somebody like me, because as much as I wanted my guests to have the best too, and I always tried to do that, and sometimes I did leave the best for them and take the least for myself. But it was just very hard because I wanted to enjoy the food and I wanted my guests to know that I could enjoy my own cooking as well as they could enjoy it all. And, or how many times has the hostess, even after she made sure that every single person at the table had everything they need, all the buffet plates were full and everything else, we keep jumping up and checking to make sure that everybody had what they need and leaving our plate cold, leaving our food to get cold, and then running back to the kitchen to fill up more platters, making sure everybody have what they need. Oh, do you need some more water? Is there enough butter? Do you need some more rolls? I've got more chicken if you need it. And, I have been to events where the woman knocked herself out to serve a wonderful dinner, but she was so busy running back and forth, she didn't have time to actually eat a meal herself. And that made me sad. And sometimes I've gone to events where a woman works extremely hard for hours and hours to serve a fantastic meal, even though she might be sick herself, exhausted, suffer a migraine, had to take care of a sick child, all this stuff. And yet she would not feel that she could, let her guests down unless she knocked out a fantastic meal. And that's so hard for women. It's just really, really hard. And, women often will, work when they're sick, they'll take care of others when they're sick. And, even if it means that there's a threat to their own health. And I don't want my fellow women to put their own health at risk in that way. It's wonderful that, they're caring, giving hearts. And we women do tend to be nurturers, no question about it. But, there is some real danger there. And that is very troubling to me. And a lot of times a woman will actually turn some of that, needing to put appearance first before her own health. And that's where we move into things like the tragedy of anorexia nervosa and bulimia. Now, these are related disorders which affect at least twice as many women as men, and sometimes 3 times as many women as men, according to the statistics that you read. And these disorders also affect young teenage girls and young women far more than they affect middle-aged and older women. And if you have ever known anyone with an anorexic in their family, you know how tragic this is, because they feel that they cannot be fat. They cannot have an ounce of fat on their body, not even one. And they will make tremendous sacrifices of their own health to assure that that condition exists. And, you know, they drop to dangerously low weights, which, you know, can damage their heart and other vital organs, can mess up their skin, you know, just damage their health in so many other ways, and sometimes can kill. And some of you may remember the story of Karen Carpenter, the very talented singer who had several hit records back in the 70s. Beautiful singing voice, but she suffered from anorexia because once she and her brother became quite famous and had many successful hits, you know, she was worried about how her weight was being perceived, and she did deal with anorexia, and she died before she was 40 years old. Very, very sad. So this disease is, you know, extremely tragic, and it's my hope and prayer that as we learn more about what is truly healthy in terms of eating, that women will feel far less of a need to worry about, quote, how fat they are, and see themselves as healthy and doing what they need to do to be healthy. Because I don't want anybody, male or female, to have to endure a disease like anorexia or bulimia. It's just awful. So theme number 4 is do what you must do to keep the pounds off. Now, this is pretty dangerous territory sometimes, because there are unethical companies that have marketed, you know, weird kind of diet pills, you know, with stimulants in them, and, you know, goofy liquids, you know, that supposedly do things with your metabolism to help you, you know, either suppress your appetite or lose weight faster or whatever. And, you know, these things are seen as ways to get the weight off. And another really tragic part of this is tobacco, because over the years, you know, women have sometimes smoked cigarettes as a way to head off weight gain. And I can't think of a sadder thing. And in fact, the tobacco companies, well, they've always been very clever about marketing to people. Get them hooked on nicotine, you've got a customer for life. Now, back in the 1920s, the Lucky Strike brand came up with a theme about how to keep the pounds off by smoking our brand of cigarette. So they put out a number of print ads. Now, they did feature some men in some of these ads, but the majority of the ads that I saw an exhibit of this at Stanford University that was done several years ago. An ad for the cigarette would show a very attractive picture of a nice, beautiful, slender young woman. And off to the right, there would be a silhouette of the same woman 5 years later, only her face was all filled out. I mean, she'd obviously gained a ton of weight, great big double chin. On top of the ad, it says, points an arrow to the silhouette with the fatter woman. Will this be you in 5 years? Horrors. But there was an answer. It didn't have to be, because what you could do was reach for a Lucky instead of a sweet. And then you wouldn't, when you were smoking a Lucky, you could, you weren't eating sweets. So you didn't have to worry about gaining weight. And gosh, what a, you know, what a killing for the tobacco company. You know, they get women to feel like they're doing something good for themselves, and they make a whole bunch of money by getting all these people, men and women, especially women, addicted to nicotine. Wow. Boy, what a terrible solution. And unfortunately, many women, even to this day, sometimes will smoke cigarettes as a way to keep the weight off. I remember first in college, I heard about women who were smoking cigarettes because they were afraid of gaining weight. They felt the same way that this, commercial was pitching women for. You know, if they smoked, they wouldn't be eating. And, I heard about women who had, been smoking cigarettes, and they, were kind of concerned about that because of the risk of lung cancer and other diseases. So they would quit, and then they would take up smoking again because they had gained weight. I remember one woman saying, well, I quit smoking and I gained 15 pounds. And it's like, yeah, nobody wants to gain 15 pounds. I hated it when I gained 15 pounds. But gosh, what a way to solve the problem, because they were, you know, finding a solution that was far more dangerous to their health. We know how bad cigarette smoking is now. And yet there were women that were willing to take that risk to keep those pounds off. This is another tragedy. Absolutely. So, all of these things, were just amazing recollections to me, all these four themes. Because even though I never smoked cigarettes, thank goodness, and I never will, I really empathized with, what the women were going through that had felt that so desperate to keep those pounds off that they had to revert to smoking cigarettes. So all of these themes were part of what made my dietary journey a lot more complex. And I'm very glad that I recalled some of this, because I just did not realize what an impact some of this was actually having until I actually looked back on it and could put words to it. So now I'm going back to the question, is the carnivore diet harder for women? Well, the journey to the carnivore diet, that's probably a better way to phrase the question. It may be harder in some respects, simply because women have different experiences. For example, I have never had children, so I have never gone through a pregnancy and childbirth. And I know that there are a lot of hormonal and metabolical and possibly emotional issues. Women gain weight during pregnancy, and then there's, all the challenge, how do I get the weight off since I had the baby? And I've never gone through any of that, but I know that's a tough one for a lot of women. And so for women who have gone through the childbirth experience, there may be some challenges that I am not familiar with. But for me, the answer is the carnivore diet harder for women, or the journey to the carnivore diet harder for women? No, the answer for me is no, because in fact, adopting the carnivore diet was the best thing I ever did. And now that I have been at it for a couple of years, it's the easiest diet. It's the easiest diet for me to stay healthy. I don't have to pretend anymore. I don't have to force myself to eat foods I don't like. I don't have to go through this game playing at the dinner table about pushing food around my plate so I won't have to eat so much, because I can eat healthy food until I'm comfortably full, and then I can feel like I don't need to eat anymore. And because of this, I was able, after almost 5 decades, to throw off carbs and sugar. And my gratitude for being able to do that is profound. And I am also very grateful that all of this messaging that I've talked about throughout this video doesn't have to hurt me anymore, because I have new messaging, as we all do, men and women. Number one, men are human beings, women are human beings. Women are not birds, and we don't have to eat like them. And number two is, there's no such thing as women's food. There's food. And, we all have individual tastes. We all have individual dietary needs. But whatever food helps make you healthy, there's no gender label to it. You don't have to separate it. It's just there for anyone to partake of, So now I don't ever worry about women's food anymore. Thank goodness. And the third one is, yes, there is a proper human diet, not a proper men's diet, not a proper women's diet, a proper human diet that we can all benefit from. It may take different forms. You may find keto is best for you, or ketovore, or some combination, or carnivore. Carnivore for me was the answer, and still is, and most likely always will be. So I'm very grateful to have gone through this difficult recollection of a part of my dietary history that I had kind of forgotten. And I hope it's been helpful to you as well. You may not have found a lot of this applying to you, but I hope it at least provides a historical perspective about some of the special challenges that we women have often faced in our dietary journeys. So I want to thank you so much for joining me today. And as I said before, please do press the like button if there's something that you found that resonated with you. And I hope I will see you in future videos. Always remember, be kind to one another, as our friend Bill reminds us. Listen up, lift up, and cheer up. I wish you all the best, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again. Bye.